This is Dr. Roberta Morowitz, Florida licensed marriage and family therapist and director of the Counseling and Relationship Institute. Today we're going to be talking about grief counseling in elementary schools. This didn't used to be a hot topic. It's a pretty hot topic these days. And one of the difficulties that we find is that in elementary schools, there was a time when there really were a fair number of counselors who worked there. In this day and age, very often they can be contracted out or they get called in for special kinds of issues, and one of those issues happens to be grief. So what you might find is that the grief counseling that goes on in elementary schools is really for something in particular, but not necessarily individually driven. So I'll explain to you what the difference is. Let's say there is a student who is in a school who gets in an accident. It's in a community and it's pretty public. They may call in a group of grief counselors to work with the school as a whole, and there might be some individuals as well, but it's really driven by the event, as opposed to having someone who is on board regularly, who is a grief counselor, who perhaps runs groups for young children about divorce, which is also a loss, and there's also some grief that's attached to that. So there are lots of different reasons why you would want grief counseling in elementary schools. Elementary age kids deal with grief much more than, and better, to be honest with you, than we very often think that they will. We don't necessarily give them very much credit, but they certainly do need a lot of support, and it is helpful for them to learn ways of coping, much of which they're just deficit at because of the number of years that they've been on the planet. So it's very useful. Oftentimes we don't get it at home. People don't talk about some of the issues that are really difficult to talk about, and the schools can be a really good place for that to happen. So it doesn't really make a difference whether the grief issue is something like a divorce, somebody in the family dying, it could be a pet that dies, it could be a friend who has moved out of town, it could be they've moved from another city, it could be any number of things that are a loss. So when we think of loss, you should be thinking of grief, and you should be thinking that there really is a very good role that the elementary schools can play. Sometimes it's a matter of finances and whether or not they have the money for grief counselors who are able to work there, but when they do, it's really helpful for you as a parent to be able to let the grief counselor know, or the counselor in general, if they're not necessarily just a grief counselor, know what it is that your child is going through so that they can work with them while they are in school during the school hours. If there's any additional help you need, you can find me at www.drmorowitz.com. Thanks for watching. Dr. Roberta Morowitz. Bye-bye.